Hey, Composing Gloves here. In this video, we are going to cover many background concepts that must be properly understood in order to really get into the field of acoustics. This is aimed at the beginner and does not have any special requirements for math. These are not all the basic skills by any means, but a fair amount of them. I will also give examples of where this knowledge can be practically applied in the life of an audio engineer. It is expected that you already know the information within the Sound and Synth Basics series available on my YouTube channel. So our first topic is linear oscillators. They're also called harmonic oscillators. This is just an oscillator that moves in a line to create something called simple harmonic motion. The classic example of this is the weight attached to the spring. If we track the weight as it moves up and down, we will find that it forms a simple sine wave. If we ignore friction, then it will continue to do this forever and the output will always be a sine wave. We're going to get into more and more of why this is as we get going into more and more basics, but I have to give you something at the beginning. We can also note the resting position of the weight. This is called equilibrium. We can also note its maximum displacement, which just means the furthest the weight can go away from equilibrium. This is called amplitude. And we're going to get into a little bit about this, because when we say amplitude, there's different kinds of amplitude. And so when I say the maximum it can go away, and they refer to that as amplitude, I'll point that out again later on down the line. We can also note that based on where the weight starts, we'll change where our sine wave starts. So if we pull down our weight a little bit and then let go, all other things being the same, we will start at a different position in our sine wave, which can be really important and useful in sound design. Okay, so the practical use of this is now we can observe the speed of the weight, and that will allow us to change the frequency of the sine wave. We can also observe the amplitude to change the level of the sine wave, and we can observe the position of the weight is in order to change its phase. Or just observe its phase, I guess, if you just want to look at it or whatever. The combination of frequency, phase, and amplitude can be used to form any sound, which is a pretty incredible idea, and it's one in sound design that becomes really important. If you look at any sort of an additive engine such as Harmor, you will see this principle being used. Furthermore, this principle also becomes a fundamental principle in instrument construction. So our next topic, so that's it for that topic. Moving on to our next one. Our next one is velocity amplitude. So now we're getting into the different types of amplitude, which can be a bit confusing and very important as you get further in, especially if you want to be able to visualize how sound moves and behaves. It can be pretty important to understand some of these. As the weight moves, it is gaining and losing velocity. Velocity is the speed of something in a given direction. As it approaches a maximum or minimum displacement, we see that it loses velocity. And that makes sense, right? As it gets further away, there are going to be forces. In this case, it's called elasticity, and we're going to get into that in just a sec. But elasticity is going to demand that this slows down because it's trying to return to its original position. There's actually a whole bunch of other laws that have been observed about this, but we're not going to worry about those right now. We can also see that as it approaches equilibrium, so as it's coming back to the equilibrium, it's going to increase in velocity. It's going to gain some speed. It is at its maximum velocity at equilibrium, and this is called velocity amplitude. And this is where inertia comes into play. It can't just stop dead on the path, on the equilibrium. It keeps going. It can't stop. And these two properties are going to be important, so keep them in your head later on down the line. The practical use of understanding this is that if we desire to affect a sound by amplification or attenuation, we can more specifically target a wave's motion. It also helps a ton for just visualizing sound. It's basically a really good understanding of phase. I also want to issue a warning right here. Don't confuse velocity amplitude with frequency, because when you get into the details of what each one means, sometimes you can mix them up. Frequency measures the speed of the completion of a cycle, while velocity measures the speed of a thing as it moves to a portion of that cycle. So a velocity is usually specific to a piece of the cycle as it moves to the minimum or maximum. Frequency is talking about the whole cycle. Like how fast are we completing this whole cycle? All right, moving on to displacement amplitude. Again, we're going to look back to the weight, and we can notice a couple other things. We notice that as the weight moves away from equilibrium, there is a point to which it can move no further. and this point is symmetrical for both the minimum and maximum values. This is referred to as displacement amplitude. So the farthest it can get away, that's displacement amplitude. And this is the one that when someone says amplitude, they're probably referring to the displacement amplitude. So we just pretty much assume that's what people are talking about when they say amplitude. The practical use of this is much more far-reaching than it at first looks. Besides the fact that you've probably already used it 100 million times, it can get even deeper. As you move into using this information to calculate useful results through an equation, or maybe you're trying to create a synthesizer or some sort of a system where displacement amplitude is really important, displacement amplitude is going to define your range, or all possible values for the y-axis. This is really important. Let's say that you had an amplitude where your displacement amplitude was 5, right? And you're working in a digital system. This is called DSP, or digital signal processing. If you get a value of 6 somewhere, you're going to have an issue because that is outside of your range. You can't go that far. It doesn't exist. So you're going to experience clipping, and that sounds like crap. So you really want to understand displacement amplitude. You probably already have a pretty good understanding of it. Okay, so that's enough of that. You'll see this stuff, you'll immediately just grab and use it sort of intuitively. You just need to know about this stuff and some of the properties it can have. So our next topic is going to require a question, and I asked you to remember 2 principles from before, and we're going to see if you remembered them. My question is, what is needed for sound to exist? And a lot of people, upon hearing this question, especially in the field of audio, will be tempted to say a medium is needed for sound to exist because they think of space and they're like, oh, there's no sound in space because it has no medium. And so I'm like, okay, fine, that's correct. But there's another answer. What if I refine my question to say, what is needed for sound to exist on Earth? And they might be going like, what do you mean? And then I could get a little more specific. I could say, I know that a medium is needed, right? So we could use air, water, or even steel to have sound. Sound can exist in those mediums, but that's not a big deal because I already know this. It's not very useful. I can't really change anything about that. We've got to have a medium. I want to know what medium should I use. By understanding how the medium has sound, I'm able to make more creative decisions and also understand what's happening. If I'm going to acoustically treat a room, then I want to be aware of the various ways sound is behaving with this room. So my real question is, what properties must a medium possess for a sound to exist in it? That's the real question. That brings us to our next topic, which you should remember from before, and that is elasticity. Now, don't confuse this with inertia. I've seen a couple things online where people have gotten a little weird about how these things combine. So let's just look at the definition of elasticity. Elasticity is the ability of an object or material to resume its normal shape after being stretched or compressed. And a really great example is a rubber band. Though you can stretch it, the rubber band's elastic properties will attempt to return to its original shape. And they will exert a pressure on your hand. Like they're trying to get back to that original shape, yet they're able to be stretched. This property is one of the properties that allows for waves to exist. So this is one of the properties. You can also see this in air particles, because when air particles are moved, they will demonstrate elasticity by moving back to where they were. They do not want to be moved. And the same for water. Water, if you get out of a pool, there's not a hole where you just were. Water fills that space back in. It is elastic. And there's variations on elasticity. That's where things can get a little complicated. We are just going to move on for now. Hopefully you've got a good idea of what elasticity is on just a general level. So let's look at something else real quick. The denser a medium is, the faster it can transmit a wave. This is like incredibly important to understand. So if it's a denser medium, it will translate sound faster than a less dense medium. Temperature also affects the speed of sound. And if you're in live sound, you found this out pretty quick if you have done any touring. A hot temperature will increase the speed of sound and a cold one will slow it down, such that sound is faster in humid air than in dry air if the temperatures are the same, because one is denser than the other one. Sound is also faster in steel than in water, and elasticity is what makes this possible. Another quick note is, though one on the note of the humid air and dry air, it can get much more complicated than just, oh, the sound sped up. Because when a medium gets denser or less dense, it will treat the absorption of particular frequencies differently. So things can get way more complicated than what we're seeing right here. These are just general principles. So that brings us to our next property. Okay, so elasticity is really great, but is it enough for sound to exist? And the answer is no. We need something else, and it's called inertia. So inertia is the counterpart to elasticity and is defined as a property of matter by which it continues existing in its existing state of rest or uniform motion in a straight line unless that state is changed by an external force. So that's, again, a lot of words. Just sit down, really think about what this means, try to make sense of it, compare it to elasticity, and now I'm going to give you a couple of things that will help you come to some conclusions about what this means. So we know, back to our example of the weight, that as our weight moves down, it is approaching a minimum displacement, right? It's going to go to the maximum lowest value it can have. And then as it goes up, it's going to increase in velocity. Once it's reached equilibrium, we've already learned that it is at its maximum velocity. And it got to that value because it is elastic, right? It wants to return to equilibrium, but it's going to continue going on its way. And the reason is inertia. So elasticity is working against inertia. And so sometimes inertia wins, sometimes elasticity wins. And because we have other forces involved, the weight will eventually stop moving. Well, not completely, but it will dramatically slow down to the point where it looks like it's not moving. And this is because of friction. So if we were to ignore forces, this battle between inertia and elasticity would continue on its way forever. So just really important that you sort of get a grasp of what this means, because when we get into waves, which you're going to in a little bit, this is like uber important. So, okay, number 6 is the speed of sound. So we've already talked a little bit about this, and I just wanted to define a couple of things because you may hear a huge number of things on this topic. So as you already saw, the speed of sound can change depending on the medium and temperature. When using the speed of sound for calculations, you will find various measurements in different books and different measurements that instructors use for this value. And all my academic work in the acoustic courses that I took with the speed of sound, we use the constant of 1130 feet per second as a general number. Most books I've read use this number. Occasionally there's small discrepancies, and the speed of sound does change based on all those things we already talked about. So I'm just letting you know, you generally will use 1130 feet per second. Here is the speed of sound in various medium. So based on the speed of sound, inertia, and elasticity in our talk about medium, we can understand some pretty cool stuff. Because the speed of sound varies in mediums, we do not hear sound from one medium, but several. So you may have been under the impression that sound reaches you in just one wave. I don't know. It's kind of weird. It doesn't make any sense after you learn a couple of these basic things, but that's how some people think of it. That's just simply not true. You actually hear sound coming through several mediums at once. Let's say that you're in a room with a metal pole stretching from one end to the other, and your friend is in this room as well. At the other end of the pole, you're at one end, they're at the other, and they hit the pole, right? So the sound's gonna come towards you because they just hit this pole, and the first thing you're gonna hear is the sound actually coming out of the pole because the pole is a denser medium. And then you will hear the sound coming through the air because the air is a less dense medium and the speed of sound is actually slower. Take speech, for example, as well. When you speak, you will first hear the sound through your bones and then through the air. And this is why you sound so different to yourself than others sound to you. It's also why when you hear yourself over a video, you're like, that's what I sound like. It's kind of a weird experience. Sound moving through bones is called bone conduction. You can even buy headphones that work on this principle. And on one occasion, I actually sat in on an interview with a SWAT team where they explain that they use bone conduction headphones to communicate so they can still hear their environment clearly. So their ears are actually open. The bone conduction headphones sit around your ear and vibrate your bones. It's pretty cool. So, okay, that's really cool. There's a lot of really interesting stuff in there. Let's move on to the next one. Things can get a little confusing here, but it's really good information. This is the wave types, right? So we know there are these wave things, and that's what sound is, but what the heck are these wave things? Well, there are three types of waves that we are concerned with as we start out in acoustics. They are longitudinal waves, transverse waves, and concentric waves, or concentric waves. I'm not sure exactly how to say this word. I've heard other people say it, I just can't remember it right now. Each of these wave types also carries with it a particle motion, so it induces a particular motion in the particles. We should note, as is covered in the Sound and Synth Basics series, that sound occurs when a particle is displaced, and because of elasticity, it tries to return to its initial position. So we just talked about this quite a bit. Just keep elasticity in your mind. This is how this stuff works. So when you're trying to sort of see it in your head or understand what's going on, just think back to elasticity. I would say inertia too, but I think most of us have an intuitive understanding of inertia. So I find it useful to think about elasticity sometimes. The particles themselves, when sound is being transmitted, do not move very far. The pattern of the wave is what moves. In a medium like air, this means that as sound is displaced, the air pressure will change in various places, and elasticity is the air trying to return to its equilibrium in air pressure. So you're in a room, you have some air. The air molecules, when a wave is moving through this air, the air, like the molecule in front of like your lips, for example, when you're talking, that molecule does not go flying across the room with the wave. That makes like no sense. Instead, it's transmitting momentum to all the particles next to it. And because this particle is elastic, it's going to try and move back to the exact same position it was in before your voice messed it all up, before it started creating compression waves and moving all these particles around. And so the particles themselves aren't like flying around the room like this crazy mess. They're trying to go back to where they were. Your wave is what is moving outwards from you. So, okay, I hope that helped. So let's go into longitudinal waves. Longitudinal waves are waves that move in the same direction as the particles. These are known as compression waves because as the sound starts, it will cause air to move, creating compression in the wave's direction of travel. You probably want some sort of a visual or to sort of see this in your head. And you see the picture on the screen and you see that there are some areas where the particles are denser and some areas where the particles are less dense. And what's happening is, let's say that you talk in a room, you are displacing atmospheric pressure by talking in the room. Your vocal cords are moving and you're putting momentum into the air. As a result, this causes some air to move together, and as the air moves together, it's got to go from somewhere. And so where the air left becomes an area of low pressure. Where the air has gone to is now an area of high pressure. The high pressure area would be called the compression wave, and the low pressure area would be called the refraction. And you can actually see this on a sine wave. You can see the compression and the refraction because one is below equilibrium, it's below the original air pressure, and one is above it. And of course, air wants to restore itself, and as it does so, it actually causes the wave to propagate out, and we receive sound, which these are actually really, really small vibrations. Your hearing is insane. So let's move on to the next kind of wave. So that's longitudinal waves, and as we get further into this, we'll bring up these topics where they are relevant. The next type of wave is transverse waves. Transverse waves are waves that move in a perpendicular direction, meaning in right angles from the source or sources. A good example of this is the string of a violin or the string on a guitar. When plucked, it is going to move perpendicular to the wave's direction. So it's pretty simple, transverse waves. You can also see this with a slinky. And I recommend doing this. And when I was taking my acoustic courses, that's how they demonstrated it to us. They had a slinky and they pulled it out. You will see that they will pull out this slinky. One person will hold an end on one end and the other person will go to the other side and hold it. And they'll begin to move this slinky up and down like all crazy like. And what they are doing is they're creating transverse waves. As they move it up and down, the slinky is going to begin moving up and down, and it will actually look like a sine wave. Like you'll see it like right there. Now we can do the other type of wave. So that was transverse waves. Longitudinal waves, well, you could do this by taking the slinky and by bunching up a part of it on one end and having the person on the other end not bunch up their part. So it's been stretched out, and as the person lets go of their side, it's going to form longitudinal waves or compression waves because the slinky was compressed on one end and is not compressed on the other end. Now, this last wave, the concentric waves, and again, I hope I'm saying this right, are waves that move in a circular direction from the source. And the best example I can give of this is throwing a pebble into water and watching the resulting wave. So you throw a pebble in water, and lo and behold, there are circles appearing. And so that's pretty much where we're going to leave that one at, because we don't talk about, that's like a much more advanced topic. The application of this information is very far reaching. As you can imagine, it's the basis of acoustics. It is the basis of instrument creation. This allows you to understand, well, it begins to allow you to understand how sound propagates in a room. So you can change the room and therefore change the sound of your room to your liking. It gets much more complicated, of course. It's obviously things can get way more complicated. But this is where it starts out. And understanding these things will give you a really good grasp on things to come. It'll make them grabbable, understandable. Another reason why this understanding is so important is I can ask this question: what good is knowing how a medium can absorb or reflect sound if we have no idea how the sound is hitting it or if it even is? This is evident in tons of home studios where they put up absorbers and they think that this is a very absorbative material, and so if I put it in my room, it's going to do that. That's all I need to know about acoustics. That's how I'm going to treat my room. This is a horrible way of doing things, because they oftentimes put them in places that make no sense. They are not doing the thing they think they're doing, and it becomes more of a fashion statement than of a usefulness. Also, people will buy materials that are just very ineffective at the job, or maybe they're trying to skimp out on their budget and they want to use their budget for other stuff, and they just underrate the importance of acoustics and having a good acoustic space and having someone who knows about acoustics to go in and help them set their studio up. So this is going to begin to push you in the correct direction as you understand nodes and further topics about acoustics later on down the line. You begin to notice where people have done some sort of funny stuff. So when people post pictures of their studio, you can also sort of grade them on their knowledge of acoustics, which can sometimes be a pretty interesting move. Now, some people, they're being creative in their space. They don't give a living crap about the acoustics of the space as long as it is creatively inspiring. And then they'll worry about mixing it under other circumstances, which is one of the reasons why using reference mixes is so valuable. Grab a pair of headphones, reference mix it on that. Most people listen on headphones, and you can take care of a number of acoustic issues. So headphones do present their own set of acoustic issues. They are far simpler than trying to deal with an entire room sometimes. So in conclusion, these form many of the basics of acoustics and the behavior of sound. We could take a deeper look into each of these sections, but for now, this is fine. Just get a grip on what these things mean. Subscribe, support me on Patreon, and have a blessed day.
So people like, is laughter natural? Or because you can get tickled and you don't have to.